Men will continue to do whatever it is they wish to do. I worked in a theater for 4 years. I met countless interesting people. I went backstage and got autographs. Unfortunately, they're all in a tip somewhere because I left that place and they got thrown away. I picked up an interesting book recently on quotes by women about men, very amusing, some of them. And I went through it and I enjoyed it and I marked them. I will save that book and I will refresh my memory. But as I finished the book, I looked back through it and realized that I'd met 8 of those women. Some of them were famous women, actresses, and others were other people. I'll give you just one, it's just a funny one, and that is Zsa Zsa Gabor, who married, I think, 6 or 7 times. She said, "I was a great housekeeper. Every time I got divorced, I kept the house." I was going to say one of my favorite cartoons comes from Gary Larson, and it's supposedly the last speech of the chief of the Manhattan tribe of Indians to his people. And in the little cartoon, it just shows a chief of the Indians holding something up over his head. It's a bunch of a necklace or something. And he says, "I have some bad news for you all. But first, look at this. Isn't it a beaut?" And that's a joke about what happened to Manhattan. That is, some white men showed up in a ship, and it just so happened there was an annual event among the Indians. It had to do with the seasons. It had to do with fish migrating up through the rivers from the seas. It had to do with the birth of animals in the spring and their growth in the summer. And the coming of winter is a good time to harvest various animals. So the many tribes who lived in that area would often meet there in that place. And they would do what it was called, among other things, burying the hatchet. You did not carry weapons into the place, and you got to see people that you hadn't seen. People of other tribes who spoke slightly different languages, like has happened here in Australia. Many languages, but many of them were related. The same thing in America. And then they would meet in this place and feast because there were fish to catch and game to catch and a harvest of pumpkins and corn and beans and all the other kinds of things. And you would see people who were in your family from 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 years before who had met also back then at some other time and gone off to live with another tribe. Your daughter has married someone from another tribe, and now they come back with children. And people had been doing this for thousands of years. And every time every tribe arrived to this place, when you met strangers, of course, you had some gifts for them. And if you didn't, then you would quickly find something of value and give it to them. There was an exchange of gifts. Some ship showed up. They'd never seen anything like it. And some white men came off and tried to talk and barter with the Indians, offered them a chest full of trinkets, and made the Indians sign a piece of paper, make a mark on the piece of paper. And they later claimed that the Indians sold them that island for $24 worth of beads. That's the story. And of course, it was just lies, or what you might call in New Jersey language, bullshit. So, unfortunately, by the time I was 12 or 13, I'd already discovered lots of bullshit. And by the time I was 15, I think I was neck deep in it. So I'd started studying the culture I came from. I was reading the New York Times every day. Within a year, I had a fair idea of what was happening in every country in the world. At the time, when I was only this high, we were taken down into the basement of the school twice a year for drills for nuclear war, in case the Russians and the US went to war. Anyway, I worked my way through high school and I went to university and I went to another university. I went to 4 and I got 2 degrees. None of that's all that important. I was just chatting during a little bit of lunch we were having, and one of the camera persons mentioned her horse and difficulty of buying medicine for her. This doesn't relate to her problem really, but when I mentioned horse chestnuts and the fact that they're medicine for horses, she wanted me to show you a couple. So the common horse chestnut of England that English people know from their gardens is not from England. It's from the Caspian Sea and the Balkans area, but it's been in England for 1,000 years. And I have those elsewhere in pots, and I have them on the property. This is a cross between that one and another species of the genus Aesculus. Aesculus hippocastanea is the common horse chestnut of Europe. Aesculus Pavia from Pavia in Italy. And if you put those two together in some gardens where they have been separated for many thousands of years, and we have named them and said this is one and this is the other, sometimes they will cross, and this is a cross. Pavia has small flowers and they're red. And the common horse chestnut has fairly tall flowers, like a candelabra, beautiful flowers, like orchids, and they're quite large. And the crosses turn out to be pink with quite large flowers. And then someone has even bred another one, because men are very clever. It's even very long, and it has a nickname or a special variety name, Brioti. And I'm sure there's bound to be a couple more varieties. Anyway, these trees bear seeds. We call them nuts. In this case, it's a horse chestnut. This one is also a horse chestnut, and this one is from North India in the Himalayas. And there's several species in America. They're often called buckeyes because those big, glossy, brown seeds are very attractive to children. They're beautiful when they first fall off the tree, and in many cases they look like the eye of a buck, a deer. Anyway, what's worth talking about? I tried to do some things to stop some wars while I was a child and an adolescent, and even beyond then. Between the time I was born and the time I graduated from university, there were 150 more wars and 45 million dead, although you'd have to go look in some books to find out where some of them were. So there was a war supposedly to end all wars. It was World War I. That name, the war to end all wars, wasn't coined until 1921, I believe. So it wasn't the rallying cry at the time. The Second World War was to make the world free for democracy. But that phrase came in about 1947. It was not used at that time as part of the propaganda. There was other propaganda.